The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital cast a pale, sterile glow across the pediatric ward. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion, a place where every face told a story of waiting, of hoping, of fearing. David Carter, 36 years old, carried his little boy down the corridor in arms that trembled with fatigue. Mason was only 3, but he clung to his father with the quiet weariness of someone who had already fought too many battles. He wore his favorite Superman pajamas, the bright blue fabric a stark contrast against the foretape on his small hand. His head rested against David's shoulder, yet his eyes, those wide, innocent eyes, still held a spark of curiosity that pierced straight through his father's heart. "Daddy," Mason whispered, his voice faint but steady. "Will the doctors make me better this time?" David tightened his grip, forcing strength into his reply. "Yes, buddy. They'll take care of you. I promise." But promises weighed heavy when life had already broken so many. David's world had crumbled in 6 short months. Mason's rare blood disorder demanded constant hospital visits and expensive treatments. His construction job's insurance barely covered the basics. Bills piled higher each week, and the little savings he once had was gone. Worse still, every unpaid day off to care for Mason pushed them deeper into a darkness David didn't know how to escape. His face carried the burden, deep lines etched by sleepless nights, unshaven jaw, eyes rimmed red not only from fatigue, but from fear. Tonight was another emergency. Mason's fever had spiked, dangerously high, leaving David no choice but to rush him back here. His steps echoed in the long hallway, each one laced with desperation. They passed the hospital's administrative wing, a world apart from the ward. Through glass doors, David glimpsed polished suits, shining shoes, people sitting at a long mahogany table beneath bright lights. A board meeting. Decision makers, untouched by the desperation just outside their conference room. David looked away quickly, bitterness rising in his throat. How many of them had ever chosen between paying rent and buying medicine? But then Mason stirred in his arms. The boy straightened slightly, his little eyes focusing through the glass. His finger lifted. "Daddy," he breathed. "Look." David frowned and turned. "What is it, buddy?" Mason's gaze was steady, his hand pointing with certainty. "That's Mommy." The words landed like a thunderclap. David froze. His heart stuttered. His first instinct was to correct him gently, to remind him of a truth David himself had been repeating for years, that Mommy was gone, that Mommy wasn't coming back. But Mason's finger didn't waver. His small, fragile hand pointed directly at the woman standing at the head of the conference table. David's eyes locked on her. A woman in an elegant white blouse, navy skirt, blonde hair pulled back into a professional knot. She stood with authority, commanding the attention of every suit at the table. Her voice, even muffled through glass, carried confidence. She looked powerful, successful, and then her eyes shifted. Through the glass, she met David's gaze. For the briefest second, her expression faltered. The polished mask of a CEO cracked. Shock flickered. Recognition. Something dangerously close to pain. David's pulse hammered in his ears. "No," he whispered, almost to himself. "It can't be." But Mason tugged at him with all the certainty of a child who knew the truth before the adults dared admit it. "I remember her smell. I remember her voice," Mason said softly, his fragile voice echoing down the empty corridor. David's chest tightened until he could barely breathe. Memories, ones he had buried beneath years of silence and anger, surged back. A younger version of the same woman, tired and overwhelmed, walking away from him with a bag in her hand. For a long moment, no one moved. The hospital hallway seemed suspended in time, filled only with the distant beeping of monitors and the faint murmur of voices from the emergency ward. Sarah's carefully constructed world, the world of boardrooms, contracts, and power, collapsed the instant her son reached out and called her Mommy. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. She had faced ruthless competitors, survived sleepless nights building her empire, and spoken on stages to crowds of thousands. But nothing had ever shaken her like this, the sight of her little boy's arms outstretched, trusting her as though the last 3 years had never happened. "Mason," her voice cracked. She pressed a trembling hand against her lips, trying to hold herself together. David's chest rose and fell heavily. He felt Mason squirm in his arms, desperate to go to her, but he tightened his grip, just slightly. His eyes locked on Sarah with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You," his voice was rough, like gravel. "What are you doing here?" Sarah swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to Mason's hospital bracelet, the 4 taped to his hand. Her polished CEO mask shattered completely. The tears spilled freely now. "Oh my God, he's sick." David's jaw tightened. "You don't get to ask questions." Not after walking out. Mason's small hand patted his father's cheek. "Daddy, please. Let mommy hold me." The request pierced David's defenses in a way nothing else could. He hesitated, torn between shielding Mason and giving him the mother he so clearly longed for. Finally, with a reluctant breath, David lowered Mason into Sarah's waiting arms. The moment the boy touched her, he nestled against her chest as though a missing piece of his world had fallen back into place. His little fingers clutched at her blouse, his head pressing into her shoulder. "I missed you, Mommy," Mason whispered with simple, unwavering certainty. Sarah's body shook with sobs. She kissed his hair again and again, her tears soaking into his pajamas. "I missed you too, baby, more than you'll ever know." David turned his face away. The sight carved into him, dredging up every sleepless night, every fever he had faced alone, every tear Mason had cried for the mother who wasn't there. For a while, the 3 of them stood in silence, one father, one mother, and a little boy clinging to both their worlds. Finally, Sarah looked up, meeting David's eyes through her tears. "David, please, tell me what's happening to him." David's voice was steady, but heavy with pain. "Mason has a rare blood disorder. We've been in and out of hospitals for months. Tonight, his fever spiked too high." Sarah's face drained of color. She shifted Mason gently in her arms, her lips trembling. Is it treatable?" David's eyes flickered with exhaustion. "Yes, but the treatments are crushing us. I've been out of work for weeks. The bills." He stopped himself, unwilling to show weakness in front of her. But the truth was written in the deep lines across his face, the hollow ache in his eyes. Sarah hugged Mason tighter, her designer clothes wrinkling under his weight. "I never should have left," she whispered, almost to herself. "I told myself you'd both be better off without me. That I was too selfish, too career-driven to be a good mother." Her eyes lifted, glistening with regret. "But I was wrong. So wrong." David's hands curled into fists at his sides. "You don't just get to say sorry and erase 3 years. Do you know how many nights he cried for you? Do you know how many times I had to lie, just to keep him from breaking?" Sarah's tears fell harder. Mason stirred at her chest, looking up with wide, serious eyes. "Are you going to stay this time, Mommy?" The question froze both parents. Sarah's lips parted, but no sound came at first. Then she bent and kissed her son's forehead gently. "If your daddy will let me. I want to stay. I want to take care of you. I want to make sure you get better." David's heart twisted. He searched her face, looking for cracks, any sign that this was just another fleeting appearance. But what he saw instead was raw, desperate remorse. A woman stripped of her armor, standing not as a CEO, but as a mother who had finally realized what she'd lost. Still, doubt gnawed at him. He couldn't forget the morning she walked away, the slammed door, the silence that followed. Before he could respond, Mason yawned weakly, his small body heavy in Sarah's arms. "I'm tired," he murmured. Sarah's arms instinctively tightened around him. She turned to David, voice shaking but resolute. "Please, let me stay with him tonight. Just one night. Let me prove I'm not leaving again." David's jaw clenched. His entire being screamed to protect his son, to push her away before she could hurt them again. But then Mason's small hand slipped from her shoulder to his father's. The little boy held them both, bridging the chasm with a single touch. For the first time in years, David felt something he thought was gone forever: hope. He looked at Sarah, his voice low, dangerous, but open to the possibility he feared most. "One night. Don't make me regret this." Sarah nodded quickly, her tears falling as she cradled Mason close. And as the 3 of them walked toward the pediatric ward together, the air between them was thick with tension, with unspoken words, with wounds old and new. But somewhere deep inside that silence, a fragile possibility stirred. The possibility of a family reborn. The pediatric ward was quieter than the rest of the hospital. Soft nightlights glowed in the corners, illuminating rows of small beds, each holding a story of fear and fragile hope. Nurses moved quietly, their shoes whispering against the linoleum floor. David walked a step behind Sarah, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. Every muscle in his body was tense. It felt surreal, seeing Sarah there, carrying their son as if she had never been gone. Yet the sight twisted something deep inside him, like pressing against an old wound that had never healed. Sarah lowered Mason gently onto the bed, brushing his hair back from his damp forehead. He sighed softly, curling into the sheets as though the simple act of having his mother close eased some of the pain. David hovered by the door, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had spent years teaching himself how to live without her, years convincing himself she didn't matter. And yet now, watching Mason cling to her, he couldn't deny the truth: his son needed her. Sarah turned, her eyes glistening. "He's so thin, has he lost weight?" David's jaw tightened. "The medications have side effects. He struggles to keep food down some days." Her hands trembled as she reached for the bedside chart, scanning the notes the nurses had left. She was no doctor, but years in the medical consulting field gave her enough knowledge to understand the gravity of Mason's condition. Her chest constricted with guilt. Every detail felt like a reminder of the years she had missed. She set the chart down and looked at David. "I want to help. Not just tonight. Not just with words. I can get him into programs, specialists, the best in the country. I have resources now." David cut her off, his voice sharp. "Don't make promises you can't keep. He's been through enough broken ones already." The sting in his words silenced her. For a long moment, the only sound was Mason's shallow breathing. Then a small voice stirred the air. "Daddy." Mason's eyelids fluttered open, his gaze moving between them. "Why are you mad at Mommy?" David froze. Mason's innocence sliced through him. How could he explain years of betrayal to a child who only saw love? "I'm not mad, buddy," David said softly, forcing calm into his voice. "I just don't want you to get hurt again." Mason frowned in confusion, then turned to Sarah. His tiny hand reached for hers. "You won't leave again, right, Mommy?" Tears pooled in Sarah's eyes. She leaned down and kissed his knuckles gently. "Never again, sweetheart. Not as long as I live." David looked away, swallowing the lump in his throat. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But scars didn't fade overnight. A nurse entered quietly with medication. Sarah instinctively shifted to the side, but Mason held onto her hand, refusing to let go even as the four was adjusted. His eyes stayed locked on hers, filled with trust she didn't feel she deserved. When the nurse left, Sarah pulled a chair close to the bed. She began humming softly, an old lullaby she used to sing when Mason was just a baby. Her voice trembled at first, but as Mason's breathing steadied, the melody grew stronger. David's breath caught. He hadn't heard that song in years. It was a sound that carried memories, late nights, small apartments, the life they once shared before everything shattered. Against his will, a part of him softened. Sarah noticed his gaze and spoke quietly, so only he could hear. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I can't erase what I did, but I want to make it right. For him. For both of you." David's voice was low, rough with pain. "You don't understand what it was like, Sarah. Every fever, every doctor's appointment, every time he cried for you, I was alone. Do you have any idea how many nights I prayed for strength I didn't have?" Her shoulders shook. "I was a coward. I thought chasing success would fill the emptiness inside me. But standing here now, I see how wrong I was. Nothing I built matters compared to him." The raw honesty in her tone pierced through the walls David had built. But still, he guarded himself, afraid to open the door too quickly. Mason stirred again, mumbling sleepily. "We're a family, right?" The question hung heavy in the dim hospital room. Sarah looked at David, her eyes pleading. He looked back, torn between anger and the undeniable truth. Mason's faith in her hadn't wavered for even a second. David exhaled slowly. "We'll see, buddy. We'll see." Hours passed. Sarah never left Mason's side. She held his hand through every spasm of pain, wiped his forehead when fever rose, whispered encouragement when he whimpered in his sleep. David watched from the chair in the corner, his emotions a battlefield. By dawn, when the pale light of morning touched the hospital windows, David realized something he hadn't expected. She was still there. Not as the CEO, not as the woman who left, but as a mother, broken and desperate, fighting for a second chance. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder, could she really stay? Morning sunlight spilled gently across the hospital ward, filtering through blinds, and painting the room in soft gold. Machines hummed quietly, their steady rhythm almost comforting after the long night. David sat slouched in a chair, his body aching from exhaustion, his eyes half closed. He had planned to stay awake, to guard against disappointment, but sleep had stolen moments from him. When he opened his eyes, the sight before him startled him. Sarah, still in her elegant blouse though wrinkled now, sat at Mason's bedside. She hadn't moved all night. Her hair had fallen loose, her makeup smudged, but her hand remained firmly clasped in Mason's tiny fingers. And on her face was something David hadn't seen in years, pure, unguarded tenderness. Mason stirred, blinking into the morning light. When his gaze landed on Sarah, a sleepy smile spread across his pale face. "You stayed," he whispered. Sarah leaned down quickly, kissing his forehead. Tears shimmered in her tired eyes. "I told you, sweetheart. I'm not leaving again." David's chest tightened. The truth was undeniable. She had stayed. The woman who once vanished at the first sign of hardship had endured a sleepless night just to keep holding their son's hand. Later that morning, the doctor entered, his expression serious but calm. "We've stabilized him for now, but Mason's condition requires long-term treatment. Specialized care, ongoing medication. It's expensive." David nodded grimly. He'd heard these words too many times. Each one felt like a hammer against a wall already crumbling. He braced himself for the financial blow, already knowing he couldn't cover it. But before he could speak, Sarah rose to her feet. "Doctor, arrange everything he needs. Specialists, the best treatment options. Money is not a concern. I'll cover it all." David's head snapped toward her. Shock rippled through him. "What are you saying?" Sarah looked directly into his eyes. "I built a company, David. I became successful, yes. But none of it matters if I can't use it to save him. Mason is my son too. Let me do this." For a long moment, David just stared. Anger, relief, and disbelief warred inside him. He wanted to resist, to push her away for the years of absence. But then his gaze fell on Mason, eyes wide, hopeful, clinging to both of them as though they were his entire world. At last, David exhaled heavily. His voice was quiet, almost breaking. "If you're serious, then prove it. Don't just write checks. Be here. Be his mother." Sarah's chin trembled, but her reply was steady. "I will. Every day. For the rest of my life." Weeks passed. Sarah made good on her promise. She attended every doctor's appointment, sometimes flying in world-class specialists at her own expense. She learned to give Mason his medications, read him bedtime stories in the ward, and even laughed with him over silly cartoons while fur lines trailed from his arm. At first, David watched warily from the sidelines, waiting for the moment she might disappear again. But that moment never came. Instead, slowly, the walls he had built around his heart began to weaken. One evening, as Mason drifted to sleep after a treatment, Sarah sat quietly at his bedside. David entered the room, carrying 2 coffees. He handed one to her. Their fingers brushed, lingering just a second too long. "You're different," David admitted softly. Sarah looked at him, her eyes tired but resolute. "No, I'm the same woman who made mistakes. But now I know what truly matters. And I'm never running again." For the first time in years, David believed her. 3 months later, the miracle came. Mason's condition had improved drastically under the new treatment plan. His color returned, his strength slowly built, and his laugh once again echoed through the halls of St. Mary's. The day the doctor finally declared Mason in remission, tears streamed down both parents' faces. Mason, sitting on the edge of his hospital bed with his Superman pajamas still on, looked between them with innocent certainty. "Daddy, Mommy, are we a family again?" David glanced at Sarah. Their eyes held, uncertain but hopeful, broken but healing. David placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. "We're working on it, buddy. One step at a time." Mason beamed, that innocent smile brighter than the morning sun. "That's okay. Families help each other. Families stay together." Sarah's hand slipped into David's, tentative but real. For once, David didn't pull away. 6 months later, Mason skipped between them as they left the hospital for the last time. The air outside was fresh, the sky impossibly blue. Sarah had established a charitable foundation for families facing medical crises, determined to turn her guilt into something that could save others. David had returned to work, lighter now with the security of knowing Mason was safe. But the greatest change was in the way they walked. together, not as the broken fragments of what once was, but as a family learning, step by step, to begin again. Mason squeezed both their hands and looked up with a triumphant grin. "I told you that was Mommy," he said. "I never forgot her." Sarah knelt and pulled him into a fierce hug. Her voice shook as she whispered into his ear, "And I never forgot you, sweetheart." Not for a single day. David watched them, his throat tight, his heart softening at last. For all the pain, all the years lost, he realized something he hadn't dared believe until now. Sometimes love doesn't vanish. It waits. It hides behind regret and time, but it never dies. And sometimes, it takes the faith of a child to bring it home again.